Gnome blessings and welcome. This episode, it's going to be a little bit different, a little bit more chill, a little bit more personal than some of the previous ones have been. I've been going through a pretty interesting time in life. In a pretty short span of time, I've lost one of my best friends, one of my younger sisters, two of my aunts, and very recently my grandmother. And her memorial was actually just yesterday, and last weekend was the memorial for one of my aunts. And throughout all of this, I've stayed standing. I haven't collapsed. I haven't spiraled into a place that I can't return from. My heart's taken some pretty big hits, but I've carried peace alongside the grief. So today, I don't want to offer spiritual beliefs or neat answers. I'm not here to tell anyone what happens when we die, but I figured I would share my experience, how I've made it through all this loss in such a short time, what's helped me hold it together, and some of the strange or beautiful threads that I think connect us to those who pass on. So, for any of you out there navigating grief or anyone who's lost someone and didn't really know how to make sense of the pain or didn't feel like they could, this is kind of a journey about holding on anyways. So, we'll go back to November 20th, 2012. I'm not going to forget that morning because that morning was kind of a life-changing morning for me. Not from anything dramatic or big or crazy, but just because of a kind of a quiet certainty that I had in my gut that morning. It was a knowing that I had not felt before, not an anxiety or a fear, just this kind of deep wordless pull. And it was kind of without any logical reason. I woke up that morning knowing that that was going to be my grandfather's final day. So I called in sick to work that day. Didn't really explain much of why, because how do you explain that? And I just knew I had to get to my grandparents' house, which thankfully at that time was just a couple minutes away from where I lived. And when I arrived there, my dad and my stepmom were already there. And, when I stepped in, you could feel in the air that, something was really going on. So that day, my grandfather, he was seated in his recliner, the one that he was always in, but there was obviously something very different about him. Physically, he was still with us, but it was clear that, spiritually and mentally, emotionally, he was totally somewhere else. Like, it was almost like he had one foot already on the other side. What didn't seem to be in any sort of pain or fear. He was calm, peaceful. In fact, basically the whole day he was twirling his feet in circular motions like he was dancing to music that none of us could hear. His eyes weren't really fixated on anything. It's like he was looking beyond this room, just smiling softly at something that the rest of us could not see at that point in time. And throughout that day, he would, say little phrases, things that didn't fully make sense, but somehow still carried meaning. I remember one moment where he was laughing, and when we asked, what are you laughing at? He actually did reply, and he just said, I'm chuckling away nice and easy. And another time he started saying, like, I'm walking under the bridge now. And, those were kind of interesting things to be saying at that point in time because I think he was describing something that was very real to him in that moment, something that he was seeing and experiencing, like a liminal space between life and death. And as evening came, some things started shifting, and it was kind of getting more and more clear that that gut feeling I had that morning was, going to be true. And he started trying to stand up, and he hadn't really stood up unassisted in quite a while, but he was really going for it. So my dad and we walked over to him to help him stand up, and he just clearly and firmly said, "It's time to go. Get out of my way." And so those were his final words. We helped him get up. We both kind of just figured, like, you know what, I think he's probably trying to walk to his bed or something. So we helped him walk to his bed and laid him down, and we all knew that this was going to be it. And my grandmother, my dad, and my stepmom, understandably very emotional at that point in time, so they had stepped out of the room, but I stayed in there, and I just kind of laid in the bed with him, holding him, looking him in the eyes. And it's hard to explain what happened next, but it's probably one of the most profound moments of my life. And, it was like there was something moving through not just him, but myself as well. And, it was clear that he was starting to die. And as I just kind of held him and looked him in the eyes, I started saying words that didn't feel like they were coming from my brain, but just coming from somewhere deeper. I was saying, things to him, letting him know that it's okay, that he was safe, that he could let go, that he was loved, and many other things that they were things I was saying were things that I wouldn't normally say. They weren't things that I felt like I would think of saying, but it was kind of just autopilot saying these words to him. And then he was gone. And that was the first time that I've ever been so close to death, and the first time I've ever seen someone pass, and that I've been so close to the veil myself. And in the days and weeks that followed, I feel like I kind of spiraled a little bit, not necessarily into a depression, but into some sort of inner unraveling, like my soul was kind of being shaken loose and remade emotionally and mentally. I was pretty raw at that point in time. Grief kind of stripped everything down a bit, but when the fog began to lift, when I could, really feel like I was breathing and thinking again, I was able to realize in a way what a gift that was for myself to experience, to be there, to be able to witness his peace instead of his fear, and to be there holding someone as they crossed that threshold. In a way, it reminded me of birth. There's pain, yes, but there was also something sacred and beautiful about it as well. And I think in that moment of being present in that room, in that energy, I think that's what's helped build that foundation in me, that's helped me carry on through this kind of roller coaster that my family's been going through recently. And so I don't think I really came out of that experience totally the same, being there, holding my grandfather as he passed. It didn't really give me answers or some sort of grand cosmic truth, but it did something. It left an imprint. It shaped something inside of me, some sort of quiet knowing, not like the kind that you can really argue with people about, not the kind you write down as a doctrine, but just something that, lives in your bones. And since that day, I've carried it with me. And as the years have gone on, it's become kind of a deep well that I'm able to draw from, especially going through this period of time of experiencing so much loss. And, when one of my younger sisters passed, when a good friend of mine passed, and now two of my aunts just recently passing, my grandmother passing, it's, each of those feel like a good solid punch. And I feel it still. I miss them all, and I still ache from it. It's not that I'm immune to feeling the kind of more painful sides of these losses, but I haven't broken from it. I haven't collapsed down, and I think it's because I have that kind of invisible tether back to that night with my grandfather. I saw death up close, and I saw that it didn't have to be frightening or violent or hollow. I saw peace, I saw presence, and I saw something beyond explanation, and it was beyond fear. It was, and it's not some sort of certainty or a belief that I can prove, but it's enough. And it's enough to carry me, enough to keep me grounded as these waves come, enough to trust that those that I've lost are okay and that somehow I'm still connected to them. And that connection might not be what people imagine. It's not necessarily visions or ghosts or voices, but it's real. And I think it's that first experience of being with my grandfather that was a beginning for me of learning how to listen for that connection. And that connects a lot to the very recent passing of my grandmother. And so my grandmother, she had been in a memory care facility for a handful of years now, and her ability to communicate was definitely starting to fade, but her spirit was still there. And, it was quiet, but it was still there. And not very long ago, my wife and I, we both had this moment of like an intuitive pull of like, okay, we need to go see her right now. And so we did. We went with one of my aunts and uncles, and we went to go visit her. We brought some stories, pictures of our kids, and so her great grandchildren. And, she didn't say that much. And some of the things she said did not make any sense, but uh, there were so many good moments where you could see in her eyes her soul really light up, where there was kind of these glimmers of seeing those great grandkids, talking to us, where you could tell that she knew maybe not our names, maybe not the full picture, but she knew that she was loved. She knew that there was some sort of connection. And, a few seconds at a time, you could really see that she did break through that fog. And I didn't know it at that time, but that was going to be my last real visit with her, because it was either that night or the next morning she was hospitalized with the flu pretty bad, which then progressed to pneumonia. And thankfully, my dad and aunt and uncles, they were able to go and visit her in the hospital while she was still conscious and aware, because it was not long after her being there that she was on so much medication that she was just unconscious for the rest of her remaining days. And so I was a few days into her being there where I was just laying in bed and could not help shake the feeling that it was like my grandfather somehow trying to communicate to me through not necessarily words or visions, but that same intuitive gut feeling that I had before, kind of just saying like, hey, you need to go to her again. And so when I woke up that next morning, I called out to work, cleared up my day, and spent the whole day at the hospital. And though she wasn't awake or responding, I still got to sit there to talk to her, say things for her to hear, but also for myself to say. And throughout that day, my dad and aunt and uncles were rotating through. So everyone wanted to make sure that, we all knew that it was coming to an end, and though she wasn't conscious, everyone wanted to make sure that there was always somebody there. And so, though she might not have consciously been like aware that people were there, I do think that she was able to, on a deeper level, experience that presence and that love and just those final offerings. And it was the next day after I left. I had stayed there from the morning all the way till pretty late that night. And yeah, it was, the next day I had learned that she did pass. And, that, like I said, I think that in those moments, there's some sort of awareness of a knowing that, what, there was people there with her. She didn't have to pass alone. And I think that's such a gift for anyone to be able to have with their passing, is to be able to have it with family. And so it's those sort of moments that make me believe not necessarily in dogma or some sort of theology, but in a connection and intuition and something greater that sometimes glimpses when we're quiet enough to listen to it. So, I don't know what happens when we die. I'm not going to claim to know that I know what happens, but I know some people feel like they're certain that there's, a heaven or a reincarnation or some sort of merging into a cosmic light. And some people are certain that there's nothing, just silence, that it's the end. And I totally get why we all look for these answers and cling to beliefs, because when we lose someone that we love, that unknown can kind of feel unbearable. We want a framework. We want to picture where they are. We want to know that they're okay and that we're going to be okay. But for me, I don't have those neat answers. But what I have are those moments of intuition and experience, that I've felt things that I can't really explain, that I've had knowings that didn't really come from logic, and that I've been right there up close with death. And I didn't see fear. I saw peace. I saw presence. I saw mystery wrapped in love. And so I've been close to that veil. I think about as close as you can get without crossing it or, physically being ill yourself. And I didn't come back with a map of the afterlife, but I came back with something that was, just as valuable for me. And that was simply just enough. And enough to trust that death isn't the end of connection, that, enough to believe that something continues, even if we can't define it, enough to love people deeply, even if loving them means someday grieving them, and enough to be present with someone, even while they're dying, and to not run away from it. So none of this means that I don't struggle, that I don't have my days where the grief hits like a good wave, but I carry peace too. And that peace, quiet as it is, it keeps me steady, even in the face of all this loss and mystery, because I don't think we need certainty to be able to keep going. So, if you're listening to this episode and carrying any sort of grief of your own, I want you to know that you are seen, and whether your loss is fresh, old, spoken, unspoken, visible, invisible, there's no right way to move through it. There's no timeline. There's no clean resolution. So I don't have that much advice to give you. I just have my experience to share. So no spiritual shortcuts, just my heart and my hope that maybe by sharing my story, that maybe you feel a little bit less alone with what you're carrying, and that we don't have to know everything to hold each other through something. So, I miss them and I love them, and I trust that they're okay wherever they are, and I trust that I'm okay too. So, gnome blessings to all who have lost, to all who are holding space for someone else's pain, and to all who still find beauty even in the face of endings. So, until next time.